But turning now to the state Senate. As we told you, all 213 seats in the state legislature are on the ballot Tuesday. That's for state Senate and Assembly. And while the Assembly is a Democratic stronghold, the state Senate is less certain. Democrats have a strong majority there now, but Republicans think they could pick up at least a few seats or even take the majority on Tuesday. That would split control in Albany, though Democrats seem confident they'll hold on to power. So for more on that, I spoke this week with Senate Deputy Majority Leader Mike Gianaris, who's the chair of the State Democratic Senate Campaign Committee. Senator Gianaris, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Dan.
Of course, anytime. So polls show that statewide races this year are a little bit tighter than usual. I don't know if that actually affects your state Senate races going into next Tuesday, but tell me how you're feeling in these final days of the election.
I guess the question is, what do we mean by tighter than usual? First of all, yes, anything that's happening at the top of the ticket has an effect on all the other races on the ballot. So we will certainly be affected by how well Governor Hochul does at the top. But what people lose sight of in all the prognostication is that this is an off-year midterm with our party having control of the presidency. And every time that's happened in recent history, that's been bad news for the party in power. It worked in our favor in 2018 when Donald Trump was president, worked against us in 2010 and 2014. So the headwinds we're facing are not at all unusual historically. That being said, New York is a very blue state, and we're hoping that we will still have success on Tuesday.
Where are you focusing right now? Usually the battleground areas are more of the Long Island, maybe the Hudson Valley, central New York area. What are you looking at right now in terms of these races that you are seeing as really competitive and that you want to keep or pick up?
Well, yeah, this is a bit unprecedented for us in terms of usual battleground races because the districts have all been redrawn and not by us, right? It was done by someone, an academic in Pennsylvania who was appointed by a Republican judge. So we're doing our best to figure out what that means. But typically speaking, the battlegrounds that Governor Hochul is facing are the same that we're facing. So yes, Long Island is always a place that swings back and forth. The Hudson Valley is becoming increasingly Democratic, but also home to some competitive races. And the upstate cities, you're talking about Syracuse, Rochester, Buffalo, and a new opportunity for us in the Binghamton, Ithaca area, where we have a strong candidate in Leah Webb, who's doing a great job there.
It seems like Republicans, their message in this year's elections is to really hammer home this point that they want to break what they're calling one-party rule, which means that Democrats control the governor's office, both chambers of the legislature, and the state court system. What's your overall pitch to voters to keep Democrats in the majority in the Senate? What's your message to them?
Well, we clearly don't control the state court system, and that was made evident over the last several months. But the point is, it took a unified legislature under Democratic control to make progress on so many issues that had been sitting dormant for decades because the artificial Republican majority in the Senate was stopping them. And so when we look at the national crisis around abortion and reproductive health care, New York took steps to provide protection for the women in our state as soon as we took the majority in 2019. That would never have happened with the Republican Senate. The common sense gun laws that we put in place would never have happened with a Republican Senate. And so we have the ability now to point at the last 4 years of real achievement and real progress that would not have happened unless the legislature was unified. What people who want a divided government really want is gridlock. So if they don't want government to work at all, then yes, go split the houses of the legislature among two parties. We know what that's like. It's been the case here for the better part of a century until we broke that logjam in 2018. And I don't think it's been for the benefit of the state to have the houses split and unable to come to agreement. Late budgets were a normal thing back then, as you recall. We have been able to govern very effectively and very progressively, which I believe is what the state wants.
Yeah, is there anything on deck for this coming session if you do stay in the majority? I assume voters are wondering what people are going to do if they stay in the majority or take the majority in the case of if the Republicans picked up to 12 or 13 seats this election. So what's on deck for the Democrats?
Well, as tough a year as it might be, I don't think that's in the cards. So I think a Democratic majority is likely to be here for the long haul. And we have a lot of unfinished business to do. I think dealing with housing laws throughout the state and making sure people can stay in their homes and have homes to stay in is something that we started making some progress on, but still have a lot of work to do. There are some efforts to combat the effects of big, giant, wealthy corporations on small businesses, which are hurting throughout our state, particularly after the pandemic. And I'm proud to carry a bill that would do just that and level the playing field. It has the support of a lot of the small business community, and past the Senate. We're trying to get that measure through the Assembly next year as well. There's no shortage of things that we have to do, including focusing on the economy at this difficult time, making life more affordable for New Yorkers, expanding childcare and pre-K throughout the state. There are things that we have made significant progress on that are still in progress, and so we have to finish the job, and that's what people can expect with our majority.
Do you think that progress will be blocked if you lose a few seats and you lose what you have as a supermajority in the Senate right now? I think that was more important when you had Andrew Cuomo as governor, and you may have needed that veto override power a little bit more then. Do you see that as a necessity now moving forward with a Governor Kathy Hochul if she wins in November?
We want to have as many seats as we can have, obviously. But you pointed out we had more hostility coming from our own governor back then, which is no longer the case. And even then, we never had to exercise the override power that we had with the supermajority. Sometimes it's just the leverage that's obtained from everybody knowing that it exists that helps negotiations along. But we have worked very cooperatively with Governor Hochul by all accounts. She has done a very responsible job and governed in a more collaborative fashion than her predecessor, low bar as that may be, but she has been more solicitous of other people's opinions and deciding the right way forward. We certainly appreciate that. So look, we would love to have a supermajority, but if we come up a couple of seats short of that, it will still be the second largest majority in the history of the state, and we'll govern just fine and very effectively.
Now, what if Lee Zeldin wins the race for governor and we have a Republican in the governor's office, you have the majority in the Senate, Democrats will keep the Assembly, no problem. What do you see as that dynamic if it happens next year between the legislature and the governor? How would that change things?
Well, it would certainly change things a lot when we would move from a legislature that is working on enacting things for the betterment of the people of the state, helping people afford their lives better, afford their rents, take care of their children, afford higher education, improve lower education as well. There's all sorts of things we can do with Democratic control of the houses and the governor. If we have a Republican governor who is, by his own accounts, a Trump acolyte, trying to reverse the progress that we've made, it's going to become a much more of a hostile and defensive posture we would adopt than is currently the case. I don't think that's for the benefit of New Yorkers. I hope they don't see that either, and therefore elect Governor Hochul to another term. But we'll find out in about a week exactly how that's going to come down.
Before I let you go, I want to ask you about the Court of Appeals. So if you do keep the majority in the state Senate, in January you will vote to confirm or reject, if you want to, the governor's next pick for a chief judge for the Court of Appeals. I understand there's been a lot of talk about what that person should be, what their background should be. Who do you see as the person who should be the next chief judge of our state's highest court, and what are you hearing from your colleagues on that?
Well, context is important, right? And we're coming off of a tenure, Janet DeFiore's tenure, which by most accounts has been the worst administration of a chief judge in Court of Appeals modern history. And so we've got a lot of work to do to right the ship there. Part of the problem was there's not a lot of diversity in terms of experience on the court. It's dominated by people of a certain background and has neglected other experiences throughout our state that would be of benefit. Myself and 20 of my colleagues in the state Senate signed a letter to the nominating commission saying just that, that as they come up with their short list for the governor to consider, please make sure that it's not people who all share the same exact experience, same exact background, only reflect a very narrow sliver of the legal community, because everyone can agree that the court would benefit from having different views that they can discuss and different opinions on the court. What's important is that historically the Senate, mostly under Republican control, has been a rubber stamp on these nominations and has just, in some cases, had hearings and votes to confirm on the very same day, not very deliberative and transparent. And we're committed now to fixing that as well. And taking seriously our powers under the state constitution to advise and consent on these nominations. And so when the governor makes her selection in the next month or two, we will be taking it seriously. I know Senator Hoylman intends to be very deliberate as the chair of our Judiciary Committee and overseeing this process, and people can expect a very transparent and open debate about the direction of the court.
It's really interesting. It'll be really interesting to see how that turns out in January and the weeks following as that nomination moves forward or doesn't. Senate Deputy Majority Leader Mike Gianaris, thank you so much.
Thank you, Dan. Make sure everybody gets out and votes, Dan.